By Sri Lanka's best internet package for online learning and online working with many amazing offers. Call 1212 for more information. Sri Lanka Telecom.
ලෙන්ගතුකම වැඩි කරගන්න ලව්ජු රුපියල් 50ට අඩු කළා.
මාමේ එන්න අපිට එකක් බොමු.
Tonight, truth versus fiction. World-renowned virologist reveals the facts behind the PCR versus antigen test argument.
If you have a patient who you want to diagnose, then PCR is probably the method of choice. When you're trying to control transmission and you're trying to identify people who are most infectious, the antigen test would be quite satisfactory.
Setting a proper example. Domestic violence report shows rampant physical and psychological abuse against women on the rise, with children carrying the scars. I tried and failed. Former Eastern Province Governor Hizbullah says his efforts to arrest Zahran unsuccessful, possibly due to official protection. Steadying the ship, the Monetary Board decides to maintain rates at current levels, with maximum interest rates set for mortgage loans for salaried workers. All this and much more coming up on this Thursday, the 26th of November 2020.
නව sunlight sakura. දැන් දික්කල් පවතින sakura මල් සුවඳින්.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and welcome to First at 9. I'm Shanella Fernando in your top stories for tonight. With the COVID-19 global pandemic spreading, the need for quick identification who have contracted the virus has become ever more vital. With the PCR tests and rapid antigen tests being used as the main testing methods, the head of the Department of Virology at the University of Hong Kong, Professor Malik Peiris, says that while the two testing methods have their own pros and cons, the best use of each method of testing can only be reaped by using them at the appropriate time.
Professor Malik Peiris is a Sri Lankan scientist who is one of the world's foremost scientists in the field of virology. Professor Peiris, who has published over 600 research papers in world-renowned scientific journals, has been internationally praised for his work in identifying and controlling the SARS virus outbreak in 2003 and for his contributions to research into the spread of the measles virus in the Middle East in 2015. Professor Peiris, who currently heads the Department of Virology at the University of Hong Kong, spoke at a virtual discussion where he expanded on the differences between the RT-PCR tests and the rapid antigen tests.
So if we just compare RT-PCR and the antigen test, PCR is associated with amplifying the virus nucleic acid. The sensitivity is quite high. But then if you correlate it with infectious virus, because infectious virus is associated with quite high virus load in the patient's specimens, then the correlation with PCR is low. In other words, not every person, not every test of PCR positive means that the person is having infectious virus. Because the antigen test is somewhat less sensitive than PCR, it picks up those patients with high viral load. So the correlation of the antigen test with infectiousness is much better. The antigen test, some of the early versions of these antigen tests were not very good. But the more recent ones, particularly the ones that have been approved by WHO, are much better. So I think we need to be able to use both of these for the right purposes. Because of the sensitivity of PCR, if you have a patient who is sick, who you want to diagnose, then PCR is probably the method of choice. Having said that, if you really want to make a very quick decision and the nearest PCR is 50 miles away, and the antigen test may give you a faster result. So you have to judge that On the other hand, when you're trying to control transmission and you're trying to identify people who are most infectious, for that purpose, the antigen test would be quite satisfactory because that test is rapid, but also will pick up the most infectious patients.
Professor Pires revealed that with PCR tests detecting only genetic material of the virus and not the infectious particles, PCR tests on patients who are no longer infectious could still turn up positive.
The PCR test detects not the whole virus particle, not the infectious virus particle, but the virus genetic material. So the genetic material of the virus can remain present for quite a long time after the virus is no longer infectious. So because of that, now WHO has changed its recommendations and basically says that for asymptomatic and mild patients, after 8 to 9 to 10 days, the patient is not infectious. So you don't even have to do a PCR because the PCR may be positive, but that does not necessarily mean that the patient is infectious. I showed that from the epidemiological, the contact tracing studies, it's very clear that by day 5, day 6, after onset of symptoms, there is no further transmission.
Safeguard hand sanitizer නවතම නිෂ්පාදන පෙළ නීරෝගිමත් දිවියකට ලංකාවේ පළමු වරට හඳුන්වා දෙන මැලිබන් වෙජි ක්‍රැකර්
Crunchy veggie.
2 more deaths were reported last night, once again from the Colombo district, bringing the total to 96. Meanwhile, Chief Epidemiologist Dr. Sudat Samaravira says that adequate testing is being carried out in offices where cases have been reported, with the aim of keeping businesses in operation.
Sri Lanka confirmed 2 more COVID-19 deaths yesterday, bringing the total number of deaths to 96. Further, the deceased, both of whom who had underlying health conditions, were residents of the Colombo district. Meanwhile, 502 infections were detected throughout the country yesterday, with the current virus hotspot, the Colombo district, leading the infection tally with 262 infections. In addition, 90 infections were reported from Gampa, 46 from Kaluthara, 15 from Puttalam, 8 from Nuwara and 7 from Kegol. Further, 6 others were reported from Badulla, 5 from Kilinochchi, 3 from Ratnapura, and a single infection each from Matara, Gaul and Kurunegala.
Several areas has been locked down in the Colombo Municipal Council area. Because of that, there are instances that we have seen that people who are having chronic diseases had poor access to their medicines. So because of that, we have established a mechanism in collaboration with the Colombo Municipal Council as well as the police stations to ensure that these people will be getting their due medicines. So what they can do is, one thing is that when these mobile medical services arrives to their places, they can collect their medicine from these services, or sometimes their clinic books will be collected and will be taken to the hospitals and their medicines will be dispatched to their houses. If they fail to do that, what they can do is that they can hand over their clinic book or prescription to the closest police station. Then the health authorities will collect these from the police stations and prepare their medicine, and it will be delivered to their own home. Even that people are under lockdown or that their mobility has been restricted and they can't go to a medical clinic, they will be ensured that their medicine will be delivered and that they can continue their medicine.
In the meantime, several Grama Niladhara divisions in the Kaluthara and Kandy districts have been isolated as of yesterday. Accordingly, the Grama Niladhara divisions of Atalugama East, Epitamulla and Kolamediriya in the Bandaragama police area will remain isolated until further notice. Furthermore, the Grama Niladhara divisions of Bulugahatanna and Telemugahawatta that come under the Alawatugoda police area in the Kandy district will remain isolated until further notice. In other developments, 369 COVID-19 patients recovered and were discharged from hospitals yesterday, increasing the total number of recoveries to 15,816. With that, the number of active cases now stand at 5,557.
Former Eastern Province Governor MLAM Hizbullah alleged that protection for Zahran Hashim from a state security arm thwarted his own efforts to have the extremist ideologue arrested. The former governor made this allegation when he testified at the Presidential Commission of Inquiry investigating the Easter Sunday attacks yesterday.
Former Eastern Province Governor MLAM Hizbullah appeared before the Presidential Commission of Inquiry investigating the Easter Sunday attacks yesterday for his third day of testimony. At the beginning of his testimony, the former governor presented a three-dimensional architectural plan of the Batticaloa University to the Commission. The former governor stated, "The Batticaloa campus is a private university. A sum of 3.6 billion rupees was received from a Saudi social services organization called the Abdullah Al-Jafari Inheritance. We estimated that a total of 18 billion rupees would be spent for its completion." Following this, the witness was asked by the senior state counsel at the commission whether Sharia law was one of the subjects that was to be taught at the university. He replied, 2 subjects out of the 10 in total were to be on Sharia law. However, we would have to get approval from the Ministry of Higher Education for this. We later reduced the number of subjects to 8. Sharia law is the study of Islam. Ulemas could study this at the university. However, it is not only limited to them. Even Buddhists, Christians and Hindus could also study here. There was no planned segregation. To this, a member of the commission asked the former governor, "The plan you showed us included Islamic mosques built on university grounds. Were other places of religious worship constructed for students of other religions to practice their faith?" After a momentary pause, the witness responded, "Although they were not shown in the plan I presented to you, we had a separate plan to construct them on another 3-acre property." Following this, President's Counsel Shamil Pereira, representing the Archbishop of Colombo, commenced his cross-examination of the witness, saying, "Were the funds you received to build this university in the form of a donation or a loan?" In response, the former governor stated, "The funds were provided as a loan, repayable in 15 years, for which my son and I signed as guarantors." The President's Counsel then stated, "Usually when a loan agreement is entered into, it is signed by an outside party as a witness. However, no outside parties have signed in this case. Further, the agreement does not stipulate what action would be taken against you in case of default. In addition, despite many years having passed since you received the loan, you have not made a single installment payment to date." The former governor responded, "Allah is the basis of Islam. The agreement was signed in the name of Allah. Hence, our mutual trust stems from this. Due to this, written agreements are not an issue to us. Currently, the university is being used as a COVID-19 treatment facility. However, when the pandemic is brought under control, I will discuss with the government about opening the university under whatever conditions necessary." When the President's Counsel questioned the witness on the subject of Zahra and Hashim, he responded, "I put a lot of effort into trying to have Zahra and Hashim arrested. However, I was unsuccessful. I suspect that he was provided some protection by a state security arm." The former appeals court judge at the commission then asked the former Eastern Province governor, "Can you guarantee that extremist ideologues in the Kartankudi area will not resort to violent extremism like Zahran?" To this he replied, "I cannot guarantee that such extremism will not rear its head."
More news on the other side of this break. Stay tuned.
Ceylon Bank, the bank with a heart.
Welcome back in more news. Since the COVID-19 outbreak, there has been a surge in the number of cases of violence against women and adolescents within the country and across the globe. The Women's Wellbeing Survey 2019, Sri Lanka's first national survey on violence against women and girls, was released recently, showing alarming evidence of increasing violence against women. At least 30% of women in Sri Lanka have reported to have faced some manner of violence. Around the world, as cities went into lockdown to stop the spread of coronavirus, the mass effort to save lives has seen risks to one specific group rise. The enforced quarantine measures led to an alarming rise in domestic abuse in Sri Lanka, leaving women and children living in abusive households with no means of protection or escape. Violence against women is one of the most widespread human rights violations that impacts the progress and well-being of women and children especially. A recent survey by CARE Consortium showed that a staggering 26% of respondents admitted having experienced violence during the COVID-19 curfew. The survey also revealed that 76.8% of respondents experienced verbal abuse, 7.8% encountered physical abuse, and 5.6% were victims of sexual violence. The survey revealed the main perpetrators to neighbors at 49%, followed by parents at 25%, intimate partners at 24%, and the police at 10%. Meanwhile, the Department of Census and Statistics conducted the first dedicated national survey on violence against women using the WHO methodology in 2019. Titled the Women's Wellbeing Survey, it covered all 25 districts in Sri Lanka and interviewed more than 2,200 women aged 15 years old and above, with fieldwork carried out between March and September 2019. The survey revealed that in Sri Lanka, 20.4% ever partnered women, meaning women who have been sexually active, been married, or been in a romantic relationship, have experienced physical or sexual violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime. Looking at all 5 forms of partner violence measured, the most prevalent form of abuse was controlling behaviors by a partner. With that, 19.1% of women had reported having experienced partner violence in their lifetime stemming from controlling behavior, while 9.9% reported having experienced such in the last 12 months. This was followed by physical violence, with 18.9% of women experiencing it during their lifetime and 4.8% in the last 12 months. The report also revealed that younger women were more likely to have experienced such violence in the last 12 months than older women. Meanwhile, data on attitudes towards gender norms and violence against women can indicate how normalized gender-based violence is in a society. The survey revealed a quite shocking fact that almost half of the women interviewed, a staggering 47.5% in Sri Lanka, agreed with the statement that a man should show he's the boss, while 46.5% agreed that a good wife obeys her husband even if she disagrees. Further, 2 in 5 women had disagreed with sexual autonomy, supporting the statement that women are obliged to have physical intimacy with their husbands even if they don't feel like it. A notable fact in the report was that attitudes varied significantly with age, with younger women being far less likely to agree with all 3 statements compared to older women. Just over 1/3, that is 35.3% of women agreed men can have a good reason to physically abuse their partners, while 60% disagreed. Delving into the justifications for violence, 26.4% of women interviewed agreed that a man has the right to assault his wife if he finds out she has been unfaithful, while 17.9% agreed that a husband assaulting his wife is justified if she disobeys him. Further, women with higher educational qualifications were less likely to agree with men being justified in physically abusing their wives than women with no educational qualifications or just a primary education. Most women who experienced physical violence by a husband or partner stated that being under the influence of alcohol was one of the main triggers for violent behavior. In conclusion, the report found that violence against women is often perpetrated by those closest to them, and that domestic violence against women has a massive negative impact on children. This begs the question, by not doing enough to combat domestic violence, what kind of example are we setting to the country's future citizens? The Remembrance Day commemorating deceased LTT combatants, also known as the Mahaviru Day, which has been ruled against in courts, recently came under intense scrutiny in Parliament today. In response to a statement made by a representative of the Ilangai Tamil Arasu Katchi, Parliamentarian Field Marshal Sarath Fonseca says that while commemoration of deceased of relatives has never been discouraged, Mahaviru Day celebrations, however, will be rejected at all times. Meanwhile, the Chavakatcheri Magistrates Court today issued a prohibition order preventing Mahaviru commemoration ceremonies following submissions made by the Attorney General.
எங்கள் மக்களுடைய கைகள் கட்டப்பட்டு உணர்வுகள் ஒடுக்கப்பட்டு வாய்மொழிகள் முடக்கப்பட்ட நீதிமன்ற தடை உத்தரவுகள் பிறப்பிக்கப்படுகின்றன. எமது சமூகத்தின் எல்லா செயல்களும் பயங்கரவாதம் என பட்டியலிடப்படுகிறது. அத்தகைய கொடூர அடக்குமுறை சூழலுக்குள் இருந்து வந்தே உரையை நான் நிகழ்த்துகிறேன்.
මේක අධිකරණයේ තීන්දුවක්. මේ අධිකරණයේ තීන්දුව හැන්සාට්ගත කිරීම සඳහා මේම කතා කරන්නේ. හැන්සාට්ගත කිරීම ඉවත් කරන්න කියලා මම ඉල්ලීමක් කරනවා.
ගෞරවතුමනි, ස්ථාවර නියෝග වලට පටහැනි යම් කාරණා තියෙනවා. සියල්ල හැන්සාට් ගත වීම ඉවත් කරන්න කියන නියෝගය ලබා දෙනවා.
නමුත් මහවිරු දිනය කියන කතාව අපි හැමදාම ප්‍රතික්ෂේප කරා අපි දැනුත් ප්‍රතික්ෂේප කරනවා. ඥාතීන් සීකරන්න ඕන කෙනෙකුට පුළුවන්. නමුත් මහවිරු දිනය කියන වචනය LTT ත්‍රස්තවාදී සංවිධානයේ මියගිය අය සමරන පාවිච්චි කරන වචනයක්. මහවිරු දිනය කියන්නේ ඒක වෙනම බයිලයක් වෙනම කතාවක්. ඒක හන්ද ඒ දෙක පටල ගන්න එපා.
Rear Admiral Dr. Sarath Veerasekara was sworn in as the Cabinet Minister of Public Security today, effectively abolishing the State Ministry of Internal Security previously headed by Minister Chamal Rajapaksa, where that Minister of Irrigation Chamal Rajapaksa was given the State Ministry portfolio of Defence, Disaster Management and Home Affairs.
Rear Admiral Dr. Sarath Veerasekara was sworn in as the new Cabinet Minister of Public Security before President Gotabaya Rajapaksa today. Accordingly, the Sri Lanka Police, the National Police Academy, the Civil Defence Force and the Department of Multipurpose Development now falls under the Cabinet Ministry of Public Security. The Sri Lanka Police was previously under the purview of the State Ministry of Internal Security that was headed by Minister Chamal Rajapaksa. With this new development, the total number of Cabinet Ministries has now increased to 27. This also leaves the previous state ministerial portfolio held by Rear Admiral Dr. Veerasekara, which included provincial councils and local government, vacant. In the meantime, Minister Chamal Rajapaksa was sworn in as the State Minister of Defence, Home Affairs and Disaster Management. This is in addition to his portfolio of irrigation as well.
Convener of the Joint Coconut Industry Association, Dinesh Fernando, says that the measures announced for the coconut industry through the Budget Proposal 2021 are positive and are long-term focused. However, Fernando says that the industry's short-term issue of not having enough produce to match the market's requirement and reach the industry's potential is its main concern that the government must address.
The coconut industry brings in 600 million rupees through export earnings annually. However, despite the ill effects brought on by the COVID-19 virus on industries, the coconut industry has managed to stay resilient, earning 421 million rupees from January until August. This year's coconut export earnings show a slight drop of 2 million rupees in contrast to 423 million rupees earned last year during the same period.
Budget has announced several encouraging measures for the betterment of the coconut industry, especially for the plantation sector with a long-term focus. Distribution of fertilizer at concessionary prices, distribution of plants at concessionary prices, assistance in pest and disease control, development of hybrid varieties, leasing government land for coconut plantations are some of the measures introduced by the budget. These are all good steps, but with a long-term focus. When you look at the real situation of the coconut industry today, the industry is facing a severe shortage of coconuts for the industry to operate at its full capacity. This is a major constraint in going forward in the Sri Lankan coconut industry. Therefore, the government must also focus on addressing this short-term issue until Sri Lanka is able to become self-sufficient in coconut supplies. If we do not focus on the short-term issues the industry is facing right now, especially the shortage of coconuts, the industry is going to lose the market share to its competitors, which will be a pity for the country.
We'll return after this short commercial break. Do stay with us. Welcome back in your business news. The standing deposit facility rate and the standing lending facility rate of the central bank has been kept at their current levels by the Monetary Board of the Central Bank following the monetary policy meeting yesterday. With that, it also decided to introduce a maximum interest rate on mortgage-backed housing loans for salaried workers.
The Monetary Board at its meeting held yesterday decided to maintain the standing deposit facility rate and the standing lending facility rate of the central bank at their current levels of 4.5 and 5.5% respectively. The Monetary Board says that it arrived at the decision after carefully considering macroeconomic conditions and expected developments on the domestic and global fronts. Further, in a move to support the country's economic revival, it has decided to introduce maximum interest rates on mortgage-backed housing loans for salaried workers. Licensed banks will be allowed to charge only 7% per annum for such loans, at least for the first 5 years of their tenures. The remaining tenures of the loan are to be charged at the monthly average weighted prime lending rate, plus a margin of up to 1 percentage point. The Monetary Board urges all financial institutions led by licensed commercial banks to pass on the benefit of a low interest rate environment expeditiously to borrowers in respect of new and existing facilities. The board announced that it will also introduce lending targets for selected sectors in the near future as well.
With that, we wrap up tonight's edition of First at 9. Thank you for joining. I'm Shanella Fernando. Have a good night.